Emma sat in seat to 3F, her hands shaking as she gripped the armrests. At 28, she had never been on a plane before. Her heart raced as the engines roared to life. She closed her eyes and tried to remember what her doctor had told her about breathing exercises, but nothing seemed to work. The airplane felt huge and terrifying. Emma looked round at all the other passengers who seemed so calm and relaxed. Some were reading books. Others were typing on their laptops, and a few were even sleeping. She wondered how they could be so peaceful when they were about to fly thousands of feet above the ground in a metal tube. Emma had always been afraid of heights as a child. She couldn't even climb to the top of the playground slide without feeling dizzy. Now, here she was, about to soar through the clouds. Her stomach felt like it was full of butterflies, and her palms were sweating despite the cool air conditioning. First time flying, love. Asked a gentle voice beside her. Emma turned to see a kind woman with silver hair and warm brown eyes. She was wearing a navy blue uniform with small golden wings pinned to her jacket. Her name tag read Margaret, flight attendant. There was something very comforting about her presence. Like a motherly figure who had seen everything and could handle any situation. Yes, Emma whispered, her voice barely audible above the sound of the engines. I'm terrified. I'm flying to see my grandmother. She's very sick. And I almost didn't come because I was so scared. Emma's grandmother, Rose, had raised her after her parents died in a car accident when she was 12. Rose had been like a mother, father, and best friend all rolled into one. She had taught Emma how to bake cookies, how to ride a bicycle, and how to be strong when life got difficult. Now Rose was in the hospital, and the doctors said she might not have much time left. Emma had tried to take a bus or train to reach her grandmother, but it would take 2 days of travel. Flying was the only way to get there quickly. She had bought the ticket 3 times and cancelled it 3 times before finally forcing herself to go to the airport. Margaret smiled warmly, and her whole face lit up with kindness. I've been flying for 30 years, dear. Would you like to know a secret about flying that might help you feel better? Emma nodded eagerly, grabbing onto any hope that might calm her racing heart. The first secret is this, Margaret said softly, leaning closer so Emma could hear her clearly. The safest part of your entire journey today was driving to the airport. Flying is actually the safest way to travel. We have more safety checks, more backup systems, and more training than any other form of transportation. Emma listened carefully. Feeling a tiny bit of relief wash over her. Margaret continued. But the real secret is learning to trust the journey, even when you can't see where you're going. Sometimes in life, we have to have faith that we're being carried safely to where we need to be. As Margaret spoke, Emma noticed that the flight attendant's voice had a musical quality to it. Like someone who had spent years comforting nervous passengers, there was wisdom in her eyes that seemed to come from decades of watching people face their fears. I've spent my whole life being afraid, Emma admitted. Afraid of taking risks. Afraid of getting hurt. Afraid of leaving my comfort zone. I almost let my fear keep me from seeing my grandmother one last time. Margaret patted Emma's hand gently. Fear is like turbulence, dear. It feels scary when you're in the middle of it. But it's just temporary. The plane keeps flying, and you keep moving forward. The engines grew louder, and Emma felt the airplane begin to move. Her heart started racing again. But this time she tried to focus on Margaret's words instead of her fear. She thought about her grandmother waiting for her, probably looking out the hospital window and hoping Emma would come as the plane lifted off the ground. Emma felt a small spark of courage growing inside her chest. It wasn't much, but it was something. She was actually doing it. She was flying. For the first time in her life, she was facing one of her biggest fears head-on. through the small window. She watched the ground get smaller and smaller below. The cars looked like tiny toys, and the buildings looked like blocks. It was frightening, but it was also beautiful in a way she had never imagined. Margaret smiled at her and said, "You're braver than you know. Emma, this is just the beginning of your journey, both in the air and in your heart." Once they were above the clouds, Emma felt like she was in a completely different world. The sky stretched endlessly in all directions, painted in shades of blue she had never seen before. Fluffy white clouds drifted below them like cotton balls, scattered across a giant blue carpet. The sunlight was brighter up here, streaming through the small airplane window and warming her face. Margaret had been quiet for a few minutes, letting Emma take in the amazing view. She seemed to understand that Emma needed time to process this new experience. When she saw that Emma was starting to relax a little, Margaret continued sharing her wisdom. "Here's the second secret," she said, pointing out the window toward the horizon. "See how we're not flying in a straight line. Pilots constantly adjust for wind and weather. We take the safest path, not always the shortest one." Emma pressed her face closer to the window and watched carefully. She could see that the plane was indeed making small adjustments, tilting slightly left and right as it moved through the air. It reminded her of a bird riding the wind currents, graceful and purposeful. The pilots up front are always checking their instruments. Margaret explained. They're watching the weather radar, talking to air traffic control, and making sure we avoid any storms or rough air. They could fly directly from point A to point B, but they choose the route that keeps everyone safe and comfortable. Emma watched the clouds below and thought about Margaret's words. "Like life," she asked quietly. "Exactly like life, Emma," Margaret replied with a knowing smile. "Sometimes we think we should be able to go straight from where we are to where we want to be. But life has its own weather patterns. Sometimes we need to take detours, make adjustments, and trust that the longer path might actually be the better one." Emma thought about her own life. After college, she had expected to find the perfect job right away, meet the right person, and have everything figured out. Instead, she had worked several different jobs, had her heart broken twice, and was still trying to figure out what she wanted to do with her life. She had always felt like she was behind everyone else, taking too long to get anywhere. "The third secret is about turbulence," Margaret continued, her voice warm and comforting. "It feels scary, but it's just air moving round. The plane is built to handle it, just like you're built to handle life's bumps, as if on cue." The plane hit a small patch of rough air. Emma's stomach lurched, and she gripped the armrests again. But this time, instead of panicking, she tried to remember Margaret's words. It was just air moving round. The plane was strong and safe. "Feel that?" Margaret asked calmly. The plane barely noticed that little bump. "These machines are tested to handle much worse than anything we'll encounter today. They bend, but they don't break. They're designed to keep flying no matter what." Emma took a deep breath and tried to relax her shoulders. "I never thought about it that way. The fourth secret is my favorite," Margaret said, her eyes twinkling. "Every plane has backup systems. If one thing fails, there's always another way. The engines, the electrical systems, the navigation equipment, everything important has a backup. You have backup systems too. Your strength, your love, your courage." Emma felt tears starting to form in her eyes. She had never thought of herself as having backup systems. Most of the time, she felt like she was barely holding on with just one fragile thread. "I've been so afraid of everything lately," Emma admitted, her voice shaking slightly. "My job, relationships, even this trip to see Grandma Rose. I feel like if one thing goes wrong, everything will fall apart." Margaret listened with the patience of someone who had heard similar stories many times before. "Tell me more about what's been frightening you, dear." Emma found herself opening up to this kind stranger in a way she hadn't with anyone in months. "I lost my job 6 months ago. The company downsized, and I was one of the people they let go. I've been working temporary jobs ever since, but nothing feels secure. I broke up with my boyfriend because I was too scared to move in with him. What if it didn't work out? What if I got hurt?" She wiped away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. "And now, with Grandma Rose being sick, I'm terrified of losing the most important person in my life. She's been my rock since my parents died. I don't know how to be strong without her." Margaret reached over and gently patted Emma's hand. "Fear is normal, dear, but don't let it keep you grounded when you're meant to soar. Your grandmother didn't raise a weak person. She raised someone with backup systems, someone who can adapt, who can love, who can find new paths when the old ones are blocked." As they flew over green fields and small towns, Emma found herself mesmerized by the view below. The world looked like a patchwork quilt, with squares of farmland in different shades of green and brown. Rivers wound through the landscape like silver ribbons, and small towns dotted the countryside with their neat rows of houses and church steeples reaching toward the sky. Margaret had been quietly watching Emma take in the scenery, giving her time to process everything they had talked about. The flight attendant seemed to have an endless supply of patience and wisdom, as if she had been put on this plane specifically to help Emma through this difficult journey. "The fifth secret," Margaret said, breaking the comfortable silence, "is about the horizon. No matter how much the plane tilts or turns, the horizon always levels out. Life is the same way. Even in your darkest moments, balance returns." Emma looked out at the distant line where the earth met the sky. She watched as the plane banked slightly to the left, making the horizon appear to tilt at an angle. But within moments, as the plane straightened out, the horizon returned to its level position, steady and reliable. "I never noticed that before," Emma said, watching the horizon carefully. "It really does always go back to being straight. It's one of the most comforting things about flying," Margaret explained. "No matter what happens, no matter how bumpy the ride gets, the horizon reminds us that there's always stability somewhere. It's like a promise that things will balance out again." Emma thought about her grandmother, alone in the hospital room, 3 states away. The image of Rose lying in that narrow bed, surrounded by machines and monitors, made Emma's heart ache. She had received the phone call about her grandmother's illness 2 weeks ago, but she had kept putting off the visit. There was always something else to do, some excuse to delay the trip. "I should have visited her sooner," Emma said, her voice heavy with guilt. "I was always too busy, too scared to take time off work. Even when I was unemployed, I made excuses. I kept thinking I had more time, that she would get better, that I could visit next month or next season." Margaret listened without judgment, the way Emma imagined a wise grandmother might listen. "What stopped you from going before now?" Emma struggled to put her feelings into words. "I think I was afraid of seeing her sick. In my mind, she's always been this strong, unbreakable person. She raised me after my parents died, worked 2 jobs to keep us afloat, and never complained about anything. I was scared to see her looking frail and helpless. Fear can make us avoid the very things that matter most," Margaret said gently. "But sometimes the people we think are the strongest are the ones who need us most. The sixth secret," Margaret continued, "is that every flight is a team effort. Hundreds of people you'll never meet work together to get you safely to your destination. You're never as alone as you think you are." Emma looked round the cabin with no eyes. She saw the flight attendants moving efficiently through the aisles, checking on passengers and preparing for the meal service. She thought about the pilots in the cockpit, the ground crew who had loaded the baggage, the air traffic controllers guiding them through the sky, and the mechanics who had checked every part of the plane before takeoff. "I never thought about all those people," Emma said, amazed by the realization. "There are so many people I'll never meet who are helping me get to my grandmother right now." Margaret smiled warmly. "And it's not just this flight. Dear, think about your everyday life. The farmers who grew your food, the people who built your house, the teachers who educated you, the doctors and nurses who will take care of your grandmother. We're all connected in ways we rarely stop to consider." Emma looked round at the other passengers more carefully. There was a young man in a business suit who kept checking his phone, probably worried about an important meeting. An elderly couple sat across the aisle, holding hands and looking out the window together. A mother was quietly reading a book to her small daughter, who was coloring in a princess coloring book. "I've been so focused on my fears that I forgot about all the people who care about me," Emma said, feeling a warm sensation in her chest. "My grandmother always believed in me, even when I didn't believe in myself. My old co-workers have been calling to check on me. My neighbor brings me soup. When I'm sick, I do have people supporting me." Margaret patted Emma's hand gently, her touch as comforting as a mother's. "She still does. Dear, love doesn't diminish with distance or time. Your grandmother's love for you is as strong today as it was when she tucked you into bed as a child." As the plane began its descent, Emma could feel the change in air pressure in her ears. The captain's voice came over the intercom, announcing that they would be landing in 20 minutes and asking everyone to return to their seats and fasten their seatbelts. Emma looked out the window and saw the ground getting closer and closer. Buildings that had looked like tiny toys from high above were now growing larger and more detailed. Margaret leaned closer to Emma, her voice taking on a more serious tone. "The seventh secret is about landing," she said. "Pilots practice emergency procedures for situations they hope never to face. They're prepared for anything. You can prepare for challenges too, but don't let fear of what if stop you from living." Emma watched as the landscape below became more familiar. She could see highways with cars moving like ants, shopping centers with full parking lots, and neighborhoods where people were living their daily lives. Soon she would be down there with them, no longer floating safely above the world, but back in the middle of real life with all its complications and uncertainties. "I read somewhere that pilots spend hundreds of hours training for emergencies," Emma said, remembering an article she had seen online while researching air travel safety. "They practice what to do if engines fail, if there's a fire, if the landing gear won't work. They train for all kinds of scary situations." Margaret nodded approvingly. "Exactly right. But here's the important part. They don't spend all their time worrying about those emergencies. They prepare for them. Then they focus on flying the plane safely and enjoying the journey. They don't let the fear of what might go wrong keep them from doing what they love." Emma felt a new confidence growing inside her, something she hadn't experienced in months. It was like a warm light spreading through her chest, pushing away the cold knot of anxiety that had been living there for so long. "I've been living in what if for so long," she admitted. "What if I fail? What if I'm not good enough? What if something bad happens? What if I make the wrong choice?" She paused, thinking about all the opportunities she had missed because she was too scared to take chances. The job interviews she had skipped because she was afraid of rejection. The invitations to social events she had declined because she was worried about feeling awkward. The dreams she had put on hold because they seemed too risky. I turned down a job offer last month," Emma continued, her voice growing stronger. "It was exactly what I wanted to do, working with children at a community center. But I was scared, because it paid less than my old job, and I was afraid I wouldn't be good at it. So I stayed with the temporary office work that makes me miserable." Margaret listened with the same patient attention she had shown throughout the flight, and now she asked with a knowing smile. Emma looked out the window again, watching the world grow larger and more real as they descended, now and thinking, what if I succeed? What if I'm stronger than I think? What if this trip changes everything? What if that job is still available and I have the courage to call them when I get home? The plane shook slightly as it encountered some turbulence during the descent, but Emma barely noticed. She was too busy thinking about all the positive possibilities she had been ignoring while she focused on her fears. "What if my grandmother and I have the best visit we've ever had?" Emma said, her voice filled with growing excitement. "What if I can help her feel better just by being there? What if I learn something important from her that I can carry with me for the rest of my life?" Margaret's eyes sparkled with delight, as if she was watching a flower bloom right before her eyes. "The eighth and final secret is the most important one," she said. "Every flight ends with a landing, but the real journey begins when you step off the plane. What will you do with the courage you found up here?" Emma looked out the window as the airport came into view. She could see the runways, stretching out like long grey ribbons, and the terminal building where people were waiting to greet arriving passengers. Her grandmother's best friend, Mrs. Johnson, would be there to pick her up and drive her to the hospital. In less than an hour, she would be sitting beside her grandmother's bed, holding her hand and telling her all about this amazing flight. "I'm going to tell my grandmother I love her," Emma said with determination. "I'm going to spend real time with her, not just a quick visit. I'm going to listen to her stories and ask her about her life, and when I get home, I'm going to stop living in fear. I'm going to call about that job. I'm going to start saying yes to invitations. I'm going to start living like the brave person I discovered I am today." The plane touched down smoothly, and Emma felt a profound sense of peace wash over her. The landing was so gentle that she barely felt the wheels touch the runway, after all her fears and worries about flying. The actual experience had been nothing like the terrifying ordeal she had imagined. Instead, it had been transformative in ways she never could have expected. As the plane taxied toward the gate, Emma felt like a completely different person than the frightened woman who had boarded just a few hours earlier. The knot of anxiety in her stomach had been replaced by a warm feeling of confidence and hope. She had faced one of her biggest fears and not only survived but thrived. She turned to thank Margaret for all her wisdom and kindness, but the seat beside her was empty. Emma blinked and looked round. Confused, Margaret had been sitting right there just moments before, sharing her final secret about the real journey beginning after landing. "Excuse me," Emma said to a flight attendant who was walking down the aisle, helping passengers gather their belongings. His name tag read James. "Where did Margaret go?" The lady who was sitting here, she was wearing a flight attendant uniform and had silver hair. James looked confused and stopped to think for a moment. "I'm sorry, miss, but there's no Margaret on our crew today. We only have 3 flight attendants on this flight. Myself, Sarah, and Michael." "You were sitting alone in that row for the entire flight." Emma's heart raced, but not with fear this time. This was a different kind of racing, the kind that comes with wonder and amazement. She looked round the cabin again, trying to make sense of what had happened. Had she imagined the entire conversation? Had she fallen asleep and dreamed it all? But the wisdom Margaret had shared felt too real. too profound to have been just a dream. Emma had felt her presence so strongly, had been comforted by her touch, had been changed by her words. How could something so meaningful have been just her imagination? She looked down at her lap and found a small note tucked between the pages of the safety card she had been holding. The paper was soft and cream-colored, and written in elegant handwriting were the words, "The sky's wisdom is now yours to share. Pass it on." Emma stared at the note, her hands trembling slightly. She read it again and again, wondering where it had come from. Had Margaret really been there? Had she been visited by some kind of guardian angel? Or had her mind created exactly what she needed to hear in that moment of crisis? As she gathered her things and prepared to leave the plane, Emma decided it didn't matter whether Margaret had been real or not. What mattered was that the wisdom was real, the courage was real, and the transformation she felt was real. She carefully folded the note and put it in her purse, knowing she would treasure it forever. 3 hours later, Emma sat beside her grandmother's hospital bed. The room was quiet except for the soft beeping of monitors and the gentle hum of the air conditioning. Rose looked smaller and more fragile than Emma remembered, but her eyes were bright and alert. "Emma, you came, and you flew here." Rose's voice was weak, but filled with joy. She reached out with a shaky hand and squeezed her granddaughter's fingers. Emma felt tears of happiness streaming down her face. "I learned something important today, Grandma. I learned that the safest place isn't on the ground. It's in trusting the journey and the people who love you." Rose's eyes sparkled with curiosity. "Tell me about your flight. Sweetheart, you were so scared of flying. What changed?" Emma spent the next hour telling her grandmother about Margaret and the 8 secrets she had learned. Rose listened with fascination, occasionally asking questions or sharing her own thoughts about life's journey. As Emma talked, she realized that sharing these lessons was making them even more powerful and meaningful. They talked for hours, sharing stories about Emma's childhood, Rose's younger days, and dreams they both had for the future. Old misunderstandings were cleared up, and wounds that had been festering for years began to heal. Emma told her grandmother about the job she wanted to pursue, and Rose encouraged her to follow her heart. 6 months later, Emma's life had completely transformed. She had called the community center the day after returning from her trip, and they had been thrilled to offer her the position again. She loved working with children and felt like she was making a real difference in their lives. Emma had also started taking flying lessons. Inspired by her experience and wanting to conquer her fears completely, she had traveled to 3 new countries, each trip building her confidence and expanding her worldview. Most importantly, she spent every Sunday with Grandma Rose, who had made a full recovery and was back to her old energetic self. The end.